By the autumn of 1917, Italy had already endured more than 2 years of brutal warfare. The Italian front stretched across mountains, valleys, rivers, and some of the most difficult terrain in Europe. Repeated offensives had achieved limited results at enormous cost. Both sides had suffered heavily. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers had been killed, wounded, or captured. Despite years of fighting, the front remained largely unchanged. Many believed that another costly stalemate was inevitable. Yet in October 1917, events would unfold that shocked military observers across the world. A single offensive would nearly destroy the Italian army and threaten the future of Italy itself. The region around Caporetto, today known as Caporetto in Slovenia, occupied a critical position along the Isonzo front. 4 years, fierce battles had been fought across this mountainous landscape. Italian commanders hoped to continue pressuring Austria-Hungary through sustained offensives. However, the Central Powers were preparing something very different. German military leaders had become concerned about the stability of their ally. Austria-Hungary had suffered significant losses and needed assistance. To stabilize the front and regain the initiative, Germany agreed to participate in a major offensive. The operation would combine new tactics with carefully coordinated planning. Among the most important innovations were specialized German assault units. These troops were trained to avoid heavily defended strongpoints whenever possible. Instead of attacking every enemy position directly, they would infiltrate weak points in the line. Once gaps were identified, they would advance rapidly into rear areas. The objective was not simply to seize trenches. It was to disrupt communications, isolate defenders, and create confusion throughout the battlefield. The approach represented a major departure from traditional tactics. At Caporetto, it would be employed on a scale that few had previously witnessed. The offensive began in the early hours of October 24, 1917. Dense fog covered much of the battlefield. Visibility was poor. For the attackers, these conditions offered a significant advantage. A carefully coordinated artillery bombardment struck Italian positions across a broad sector. Unlike many earlier offensives, the bombardment was designed not only to destroy defenses but also to paralyze command and communication networks. Telephone lines were severed. Headquarters lost contact with frontline units. Confusion spread rapidly. Even before the infantry attack began, parts of the Italian defense system were already struggling to function. As the bombardment intensified, assault units moved forward through the fog. Using infiltration tactics, they bypassed strongpoints and advanced through weak sectors. Italian defenders often found enemy troops appearing unexpectedly behind their positions. Entire units became isolated. Orders failed to arrive. Reports contradicted one another. The battlefield became increasingly chaotic. In many locations, defenders were unsure where the front line actually existed. The offensive achieved breakthroughs far faster than most commanders had anticipated. What began as a serious attack was rapidly becoming a full-scale collapse. One factor that contributed to the breakthrough was the effective coordination between artillery and infantry. The attackers maintained momentum. Instead of allowing defenders time to reorganize, they continued pressing forward. Mountain roads, valleys, and river crossings that had previously limited movement now became pathways for rapid advances. Italian commanders struggled to understand the scale of the disaster. Information arriving from the front was incomplete and often outdated. By the time some headquarters grasped what was happening, enemy forces had already penetrated deep into the rear areas. The offensive was accelerating beyond expectations. Soon, large sections of the Italian army began retreating. Some withdrawals were orderly, others were not. Roads became crowded with soldiers, artillery, supply wagons, and refugees attempting to move away from the advancing front. Bridges became critical bottlenecks. Transportation networks struggled to cope with the enormous flow of people and equipment. Meanwhile, Austro-Hungarian and German forces continued advancing. The speed of their progress shocked military observers across Europe. One of the longest stalemates of the war had suddenly transformed into a war of movement. The scale of the losses became staggering. Hundreds of thousands of Italian soldiers were captured during the retreat. Large quantities of equipment were abandoned. Artillery pieces, ammunition stocks, vehicles, and supplies fell into enemy hands. The psychological impact was equally severe. Confidence in military leadership declined sharply. Political leaders feared that the entire front might disintegrate. For a brief period, some observers even questioned whether Italy could remain in the war. The crisis had become one of the most serious faced by any Allied nation during the conflict. As the retreat continued, Italian forces fell back toward the Tagliamento River. Military leaders hoped to establish a new defensive line and slow the enemy advance. However, the speed of the breakthrough made organization extremely difficult. Many units arrived exhausted. Others had become separated from their commands. Communication remained unreliable. The pressure from pursuing forces never fully disappeared. Once again, Italian troops were forced to withdraw. The search for a defensible position continued. Each kilometer lost increased concerns about the future of the war. Eventually, Italian forces reached the Piave River. Here, military commanders made a determined effort to stop the collapse. The river offered a stronger defensive position. Natural obstacles complicated any further advance by the attackers. At the same time, Allied support began arriving. Britain and France understood the seriousness of the situation. Additional resources and military assistance were sent to help stabilize the front. The survival of Italy had become a matter of Allied strategy. The line along the Piave would soon become one of the most important defensive positions of the war. The disaster at Caporetto triggered major changes within the Italian military. Leadership structures were reorganized. Command procedures were revised. Efforts were made to improve morale, logistics, and coordination between units. The Italian army learned difficult lessons from the defeat. Although painful, those lessons proved valuable. Instead of collapsing permanently, the military adapted. Over time, confidence gradually returned. The experience demonstrated that catastrophic defeats do not always lead to final defeat. Sometimes they become the starting point for recovery. Historians often view Caporetto as a turning point in military tactics. The offensive showcased the effectiveness of infiltration warfare. Rather than relying solely on mass frontal assaults, attackers emphasized mobility, surprise, and initiative. Many concepts demonstrated during the battle would influence military doctrine in future conflicts. Commanders around the world studied the campaign carefully. The lessons learned at Caporetto extended far beyond the Italian front. The battle became an important example of how innovation could transform the battlefield. When the offensive finally slowed, the scale of the disaster became clear. Italy had lost vast amounts of territory. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers had been captured. Large quantities of military equipment had disappeared. Entire formations had ceased to exist as effective fighting forces. The shock extended far beyond the battlefield. Political leaders faced intense criticism. Military commanders defended their decisions. Newspapers across Europe analyzed the collapse. Many considered Caporetto one of the most dramatic defeats suffered by any major army during the First World War. Yet the story was not over. 1 year later, the situation looked very different. The reorganized Italian army successfully defended the Piave line. When Austria-Hungary launched new offensives, Italian forces held their ground. By 1918, the balance of power had shifted. The Central Powers were increasingly weakened by years of war. At the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, Italy achieved a decisive victory. The Austro-Hungarian army collapsed. Within days, the empire itself began disintegrating. The nation that had nearly been defeated at Caporetto now stood among the victors of the war. Today, Caporetto remains one of the most studied campaigns of World War I. It demonstrated the power of surprise, mobility, and tactical innovation. It revealed the dangers of weak communication, rigid command structures, and poor battlefield awareness. Most importantly, it showed how quickly an apparently stable front could collapse under pressure. Yet it also offered another lesson. Military disasters do not always determine final outcomes. Nations can adapt. Armies can recover. And sometimes, the road to victory begins with a devastating defeat. The story of Caporetto remains one of history's most powerful examples of resilience after catastrophe. The Battle of Caporetto was one of the most dramatic offensives of the First World War. Through innovative tactics, coordinated planning, and effective leadership, German and Austro-Hungarian forces achieved a breakthrough that shattered the Italian front. The defeat exposed weaknesses in command, logistics, and battlefield communications. Yet Caporetto's greatest legacy may be what happened afterward. Italy survived. The army reformed. The front stabilized. And within a year, the nation transformed one of its darkest moments into eventual victory. Caporetto remains both a warning and an inspiration, proof of how quickly armies can collapse and how remarkably they can recover.